Good morning, East Bay. What is happening in Alameda, Contra Costa, and Solano counties? Learn about what's happening in our communities, an in-depth conversation. Welcome to today's episode of the Capstone Conversation. Today, I am joined by Mariah Lauritsen, who is the president of the Board of Central Sanitation, Central Sands, as it's known, here in Contra Costa County. And we are going to be talking about sewers and wastewater and why is that important for everybody. I am your host, Jared Asch. Mariah, thank you for being with me tonight. This is my first nighttime recording one. We are doing it later at night to accommodate two people who have day jobs and families, for me with little kids and a public servant who is just constantly working. Thank you for taking the time to be here with me.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here and talking to you.
Thanks. Tell me a little bit about yourself and your role with the organization.
Over the past 4 years, I've been honored to serve as an elected representative on the Central Contra Costa Sanitary District, as you said, or Central Stan. Since that time, I've become board president, and I've worked issues such as net zero emissions goals and promoting a DEI committee, as well as keeping the eye on the ball on fiscal responsibility. As an engineer, I've worked in the Bay Area in wastewater treatment and in high filtration applications where the specs were at the part per billion level. And then for how I approached water as a general philosophy, I recognize the power of water being approached on a regional level and that it requires regional solutions. And then also I recognize the power of one water, where you don't make silos between different types of water. And both of these require a lot of collaboration between agencies.
My first question for the audience is, why are they going to care about sanitation right now? What does the organization do? Excite everybody why they should be paying attention right now, because the agency does a lot. Right. And we're going to get into that. And it's not just your agency. It's, for the audience, we try to rotate between Alameda, Contra Costa, and Solano County of where we have speakers. So we're going to look at sanitation as a whole and how we're leading it throughout the region. But tell us, why do people care about this? Why should they be passionate and should they stay tuned in?
So if you take a look at people's missions and values again and again, whether potable side or wastewater, you'll see protect public health and the environment. And you definitely saw public health. We were testing for COVID in the wastewater during the pandemic. And then for the environment, there's a lot of opportunity for addressing environmental issues like net zero, as I had mentioned before. And so that's the basic concept. Ideally, when you consider water, it will just you'll turn on your faucet and not have to worry about it. But it does impact your day-to-day life. If you don't have water, you don't have development, you don't have housing, you don't have jobs, basically. You need that infrastructure there so that people can drink water, they can use it in industry, you can use it to play. And you also, returning to the regional aspect, you can't just worry about your own little spot. People work in one city and they play in another city and then they go home and sleep in another city. It's really a regional concept and it will affect your day-to-day life.
I chair a subcommittee of CCTA, the Contra Costa Transit Authority Board, and the one thing as city representatives have to report on special funding they receive from us, I ask, have they coordinated lights and had meetings with other city on routes of regional significance? And 14 of the 19 cities in Contra Costa all said no. And you know what the interesting thing is? What person stops at their city border, right? The traffic flows between city to city. And so I just found that you might have a couple of cases, but right, Orinda deals with traffic coming in from Sao Paulo and people cutting across. Walnut Creek deals with everybody from East County coming over through Ignacio. And so I totally get the regional approach that you're talking about.
I mean, one thing I'm proud of at Central Stan is we do a really good job coordinating with the cities because If we're there tearing up a road to do maintenance on our infrastructure, which has to happen, we're actually not the ones that hear about it. The cities hear about it. They're like, why are you
Mhm.
out there tearing up our roads? And then we hear about it from the cities. But I think we do a really good job at coordinating. We try to coordinate with projects that the cities are already doing so that we don't have to tear up the road twice.
Yeah, that's smart. And I see a project going on near where I am. And I think East Bay Mud and Central San and the city have all decided to tear it up. I don't think they were able to get PG&E on board at the same time, but it's a lot of trucks and a big effort. So I appreciate that. Tell us what does the district do? And who do you serve?
So I serve the central part of Contra Costa County. So think from Martinez all the way down to San Ramon and everything in between there. We also contract with the city of Concord to treat their water. And basically, all that water that goes down your drain comes down to Central San. We treat it and then we discharge it to the bay. That's the protecting public health in the environment. We clean that water to a certain standard that it's okay to discharge it to the bay.
I think that's really relevant. How many miles of pipes do you guys have? It's like a huge system, right?
We do serve 500,000 customers. I actually couldn't quote the number of pipes, but it's miles and miles of pipe. And the majority is gravity fed, which saves people a lot of money because you're not having to pay for all the pump stations if it wasn't gravity fed. So a feat of engineering.
And that's important because I believe something like 20% of the energy in California is used actually pumping water. I mean, we're talking fresh water from reservoirs, from lakes into the faucets in places, but that's a large amount of energy. If you could talk about using mostly gravity and reducing that energy, it is significant. Talk about what are some of the other major sanitation districts around the area, just so people are familiar with them.
There's Delta Diablo. East Bay Mud actually does both potable and wastewater. And you will see like potable waters a lot of times cover a larger range because before wastewater was often taken care of by the cities and potable water was taken care of by private companies before it became a government entity. You'll see a lot of sanitation districts are sort of within a city, but I think we're very fortunate that Central San covers such a wide area because it really does create efficiencies to have a larger area.
That makes sense. And talk about recycled water. I know that comes up a number of times as we need more and more water here. The water that's discharged into the bay, but before that, there could be a process to recycle it, reuse it. What's your agency do for that?
We do have purple pipe, and that's the pipe that where we treat it at an even higher level than what we discharge it to the bay, and then that's used for irrigation. An issue with purple pipe is it can be expensive because essentially it's redundant infrastructure. So a lot of times with recycled water, and you try to make it as efficient as possible in terms of how much pipe you have to lay down for it. So that's why you see a lot of golf courses, for example, that will utilize recycled water because you can use a lot of recycled water in one area. And then there are other options such as potable recycle, and there's indirect potable recycle where you would basically augment your raw water by treating it to essentially a very high level at the level that you would find in aquifers, like deep below the earth. And then you can add that to your raw water, whether it's a lake or even an aquifer below the surface. And that can be used by the potable water system. And then there's direct potable recycle, which is the same concept, but you'd put it in an aqueduct instead. And that would, again, go to a potable water plant to be treated there.
What's the percentage of water currently, roughly, that is recycled at the agency?
It's,
Wastewater.
it's like 5%. We are very interested in increasing the amount of water that we recycle. And it's in our interest to recycle more water because there are nutrient regulations that are emerging in the entire Bay Area, which will mean that we'll have to treat the water to an even higher level. So it's an opportunity to basically realize we are spending this money anyways to reduce nutrients to the bay. We can capture that opportunity and have an incremental increase in cost to basically put in all this recycled water infrastructure, whether it's purple pipe or potable recycle.
What is the goal? Is it 10% in the next 5 years, 20% in the next 10 years? What's a reasonable goal given how expensive infrastructure is to build out?
I would say the goal, which I won't put a time period, would be like ideally zero discharge during the hot parts of the year, right? Like specific projects that would get us closer to achieve that. Like that's just as a philosophy, right? Just as a philosophy, ideally you'd recycle all your water, right? So I'm not saying that's Central Sand's philosophy. That's sort of how I approach it, right? And when I'm framing how I'd like to approach these problems. So just wanted to clarify that there.
This is your policy perspective, right? As an individual. Okay.
Yes. But this is where coordination on the regional level is so important. So we do have memorandums of understanding with Contra Costa Water District and East Bay Med to explore water exchanges. For example, we could provide water to the local refineries, and then East Bay Mud or Contra Costa Water District could put that potable water that they're currently providing to the refineries and send it somewhere else where it's more needed. Those are major projects. I think we've done a really good job at developing the relationships with East Bay Mud and Contra Costa Water District in terms of exploring the pros and cons of those projects. So they are moving forward. We just got a report back from East Bay Mud actually last week at one of our meetings that reviewed the various options that we had done a study with them on what recycled water projects we could go through. That included your typical recycled water projects that are more like traditional purple pipe. And that also included potable recycle options. And now we're going forward with eliminating the ones that are not cost effective and then exploring the ones in more detail on what would be cost effective.
I like that approach. You're bringing in multiple agencies to serve a purpose, figure out how it can work for everybody. I also love the idea of you're going after a couple of key industrial users, which, yes, you could say refinery, oh, that's one user, but you're talking about refineries that are using a large percentage of water, right?
Correct.
All right, let's keep talking about that regional solution. You talked about that as a key priority of yours, something that you viewed. You talked about coordinating with multiple agencies in the city. How do you see this as a regional problem, and how can the region sort of coordinate better other than just the agencies you named?
I would focus on a one water concept. So coming back to the nutrient regulations that are coming up, for example, that requires utilizing recycled water requires coordination with the potable water districts because they are basically in charge of the water in their area. And basically, if sanitation districts are basically not allowed to compete with potable water because they originally needed to support themselves and put together the quality of the water that they were providing to residents. And so they were given the power to basically have stewardship, basically over the water that was available, right? And obviously, from a potable water perspective, you're very focused on quality. So that means that if sanitation districts want to recycle that water, they have to coordinate with the potable water districts because they don't have that stewardship in the way that potable water districts do. Basically, the potable water districts sort of have to lead that effort. But since we have these artificial silos, even though it's all one water, it can make that coordination hard. And the way some government regulations are set up, it can make it hard that potable water would be incentivized to utilize that recycled water. I guess maybe not government regulation, but potable water is not necessarily always incentivized to utilize recycled water because they have to maintain their water rights. And water rights are maintained by water usage, basically. For example, with one of the projects with East Bay Mud, they would utilize our recycled water basically during drought times. So 30% of the time they would need our recycled water. But if they're utilizing our recycled water all the time, that could impact their water rights, basically, and put those at risk. So that sort of creates a disincentive, right? And so that creates the emphasis on making this dance where you coordinate so that you don't threaten those water rights while at the same time utilizing the. It can occasionally be like hurting the needle.
And unless you're the one person watching the YouTube and you're just listening, which most of the audience does, my face is like perplexed by the simplicity and complexity of that situation all at the same time.
Well, think about how water rights were first created. I know I'm probably getting into
No, this comes up.
fluid,
So,
but water rights were originally created with mining right? Think about how mining works. You go into an area, your right to mine was based on if you were utilizing what was in that area effectively. And it's an extractive process. But water needs to be a sustainable process. You can't just like extract all the water, but you still have that legal basis that originally was established where water rights imitated mining rights at the very beginning of the state's history. And we still have some of those structures in the law.
that's a whole conversation by itself. I want to tackle more specifically. You talked about East Bay Mud and they would only use the recycled water during drought time. So do you have to store that up and pay for that infrastructure cost of storing that water? Or you just dump it in the bay until they say we're ready, then we'll take it?
This is a point in the process where we're exploring the options, but essentially it would be at this moment, since it doesn't include, the scope is not included in terms of creating a new reservoir, it would be just dump in the bay at this moment. You do see reservoir expansions in the Bay Area. I mean, Contra Costa Water District is expanding their reservoir right now. That's not in the scope of the project that was being examined with our memorandum of understanding, but obviously reservoir expansions can make those projects even more valuable, basically, if you were to pursue them. So you could pursue a reservoir expansion in coordination with a project that was just increasing the purity of the water that Central San produces.
How pure can this water become? Because everybody who's listening might be, well, not everybody, at least one person is having the thought, wait, you're talking about what I flush down this sink, the shower and the toilet. You're talking about, because it all goes out one pipe in each house, right? You're talking about cleaning it to a level that people can drink. That's very different than to go into a reservoir. That's very different than a golf course. Right?
So Central San would be cleaning it to a level that they would add it to then the raw water system. So it wouldn't be going straight into potable water, just to make that clear. But basically, we're cleaning it to such a point that when we add it to raw water, the raw water actually contaminates the water that we would be producing to pursue a potable recycle option. So for potable recycle, you're sending it through reverse osmosis as one example of the treatment that it goes through. It's also got oxidizers and stuff, but I like to focus on reverse osmosis. Basically, they have membranes that you can make so small that only certain molecules can go through. Think about you can make a membrane that basically the water can get through. And that creates a very high purity of water, such that if you drink it, which you could drink it, it would actually suck the salt out of your body. So you wouldn't actually want to drink it because it's actually too. It would make it so that the salt in your cells basically were sucked out. And so you actually wouldn't want to drink with water. It actually has to have minerals added to it. And that's why you just add it to the raw water as a raw water augmentation.
Okay, so many interesting questions there. Maybe we're getting more science and less policy now. But okay, first, what's in the regular water that I'm taking in my body that has the salt and everything else? Right? I guess I never thought of that. I should have asked when we did the water episode.
I mean, so like there are like minerals in water, right?
Just naturally flowing through.
If you have too pure of water, it will instantly like get items from the surroundings, basically. So you could potentially dissolve your pipes if your water was too pure because the water would be so pure that it'd leach from the pipes, right? You've heard of like hard water, for example. So that's
Yeah.
calcium, right? Like minerals in the water.
Okay.
And there need to be minerals in the water for you to actually drink it, right? Because otherwise it'd be so pure that it'd do to your body what it can do to pipes if it's too pure, right?
Okay. So I'll pivot and ask, what happens to the rest of the stuff that you take out?
That becomes a brine issue, right? This is something where I like to compare basically desalination with potable recycle. They're kind of like the same processes, but desalination needs to take salt out. But our process only needs to take out solids, basically, nutrients. And so that brine is a lot less hazardous than that brine that is produced from desalination that concentrates the salt from the ocean, right? So it's much easier to manage than the brine from desalination, essentially.
And where does all that the brine go when you're done with it? Does that get flushed into the bay or what happens to it all?
We haven't gotten to like the solution of what we would do with the brine, but there are options. So you can flush it to the bay. You can also try to sell it to farmers because our brine wouldn't have like salt in it, but could potentially be reused that way. We have an incinerator at Central San, and it could potentially be used in our incinerator where we basically power our portions of our plant with some of the solids that we produce. So those are three potential options. You develop them out, see what's most cost effective and what's easiest to implement.
I mean, that's really cool when you talk about net zero emissions. You're talking about using the waste materials and using it to fuel a plant or your facilities. You're using it to help grow crops. Just a really sort of interesting process and how complicated it is and how fortunate people don't realize everything that goes into that line item on our property tax bill.
Well, hopefully you see it all as worth it now. But just I would
Yeah.
actually like to touch on that. I do think rate fatigue. I know rate fatigue is a real thing, and all the board members at Central San are very cognizant of it. We definitely don't want any rate spikes. We definitely want to utilize the money that's been entrusted to us effectively and get you the most bang for your buck. So a lot of attention is paid toward utilizing that money effectively.
As somebody who lives in your district, I appreciate that. And I know that your biggest cost is long-term infrastructure as it is with the water agencies itself. And how do you build that out, paying for it for years to come? Let's talk about net zero emissions and what else are you doing to reduce, your carbon footprint and energy use here. So we were just touching on that.
We have created our baseline of what our carbon production essentially is. And now we're working on developing the goals. For things that we're actively doing now, we do have solar panels. We have a lot of land around our facility. You can imagine people don't necessarily want to live right next to us. So we have buffer lands, and we have created some solar panels on a portion of that land. Lots of agencies in California are putting their fleets over to electric. And so that's something that we're basically starting this year, examining putting our vehicles as much as possible to electric. Obviously, for some of the larger vehicles, there aren't options for those yet, but that's on our radar to basically convert over to electric vehicles. I think the way you mitigate those costs is through planning. So, like our 5-year program, we have a capital improvements budget, obviously, for upcoming projects. And we actually have so much work that it's hard to execute on it all because you just need to put it in the right sequence because you can't work on every part of the plant all at once. You need to keep the plant going 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. You plan that infrastructure so that you can maintain it. And it does require a lot of money, and that can result in spikes because, like, you put the infrastructure in and then it wears out and then you have to replace things. Basically, we try to plan our infrastructure replacement so that we don't have spikes in rates and it doesn't burden the consumer too much.
Now, a lot of your pipes, which you are replacing them, as you indicated, on residential street, right? My house was built in the 60s, 60 plus years. What are the lifespan of some of these pipes that are going into people's yards? What is the danger of that? Educate the consumer part of us now.
The first thing I'd like to educate is, like, we have our pipes that we maintain. Your homeowners or renters who have to deal with it if the homeowners don't maintain the pipes, they have a connection to our infrastructure that they are responsible for maintaining. And a lot of people don't realize that. And it can come as a big expense if suddenly it breaks. And obviously, you have to repair it. So, Central San does have a program for that where we basically give financing to homeowners to help them replace that infrastructure so that it can be paid out over a long time period instead of a huge bill that hits you all at once. Just to pitch that really fast to all the homeowners. It will also help us because, like, if there are cracks in your pipes where rain can leak in, like when there's a heavy rain, that water goes into our infrastructure and makes it more difficult for us to manage heavy rain, basically, because then we have to size for that amount of water that's coming through. There's my pitch to the homeowners. Can you repeat the original question before I got on my pitch?
Yeah, no, that was great. It was really how sturdy is that infrastructure, right? How long was it made to last for? Built in the 60s.
Yeah, so it can last a really long time. It can last decades, right? I mean, that's why there's concern about lead pipes, right? Because obviously we don't put lead pipes in anymore, and we haven't in forever. But the United States infrastructure, has put in lead pipes previously, and so now we have to replace all of this. We don't really have issue that's just an example on how things can stay for decades, basically. We have a program where we track all our pipes. We actually have pictures of every single manhole in our area. So that tells you the detail that we go into and making sure that we have documented what pipes are where and how we maintain them, basically.
And I see them out. So I learned during the 2023 of all the atmospheric river that there was a huge pipe that connects half my neighborhood through the other half in what is a dry creek during the year, but it catches all the rain runoff, right, from everywhere in the neighborhood and flows tremendously. I mean, last year I think it flowed for 7 months, and I've never seen it go that long. But I learned that there's a huge pipe that connects through for Central Sands and actually comes right in between my neighbor's fence and my fence. And that isn't my pipe, right? That's from my house out to the street, that there's this other one cutting in. And I was talking to the guy and he said, yeah, that should have been in your housing disclosures. I'm like, no, that wasn't. I'm
Oh,
like,
yeah, but
so
been having this country.
I went back and I looked that night. Like I was like, whoa, what is here? But I give them credit because I think they were out there. I could see them, that area from my window at my desk. I think they were out there 2 or 3 times last year checking on it. And the sewer relatively in front of my house, that sewer grate that you talked about having the images of, I think once a quarter, they know that it needs to be clean and it's like a flagged area. So I feel relatively like they're on it. They come out with a truck for a couple hours and are paying attention to it. So I
So
appreciate the worker being on top of that.
we do have a lot of easements, and it does occasionally create conflicts. Like, imagine if you're a homeowner and you didn't get in your disclosures, and then you build something over a pipe, and Central Sand has an easement, basically. And if we need access to the pipe, we need access to the pipe, right? One thing Central Sand has been putting the effort in recent years is basically trying to move, if we can, move those pipes to the road so that we don't necessarily need an easement to your backyard. That's not possible in every area, but in areas where it is possible, we are trying to move our pipes to the road so that they're not easements to your backyard.
Well, I appreciate it either way. And I think my point in there was I really appreciate the workforce being on top of like key areas right after the storms, making sure it was safe, that they're cleaning out the system. I guess 2 last questions. One on technology. How are you guys embracing new technology in everything?
We have been expanding our personnel, partly for security, right? Because we don't want to be one of those people, one of those agencies that are hit with a ransomware or something like that. So we've done a great job at just increasing our security because we
Mm.
recognize the risk and we don't want to be spending money on things like ransomware, basically. I did mention the manhole pictures. That was actually a technological improvement to basically have digital documentation of everything. And that was an upgrade in digital technology. I don't think people are necessarily aware of all the controls that go into the plant and running the plant. But without that, it would be very difficult to run the plant. And if every time you had to turn a valve, you have to send an operator out there, which in turn potentially puts the operator at risk, depending on where the valve is, how high it is, stuff like that. A lot of that is automated, and the operators can run it from the board for
The image of Homer Simpson working at his desk in the nuclear power plant just popped into my head, right? And all the technology, it's just pushing a button at this point, right?
yeah, and it definitely helps. Like, I can't count the number of hours I've done with just documenting, is this valve failed closed or failed open in my own job as an engineer? Because that's part of safety is if there's an emergency happening, is this valve supposed to fail open or fail closed? And how does that affect the rest of the unit, basically? It's not only for running efficiently, but also for safety.
What else do you want people to leave here with? What else should we know about the sanitation district?
Well, ideally, you don't worry about us ever, but hopefully you do know about us. And we do have an academy every year for those who wish to attend. I think this year it's going to be happening early summer, late spring. Also, if you're into activism, I would definitely encourage your sanitation districts, your potable districts to look at water regionally and create solutions regionally, because that's how we'll be able to create sustainable solutions that will get us through essentially what is a new normal, the constant drought. It's not going away. We're going to need water supply. And honestly, we've used up our water supply. The next drop of water is recycled water, whether that's purple pipe or potable reuse. So definitely push your elected representatives to take recycled water in all its forms seriously.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And remember, as you're listening to this, that you vote for your sanitation district. Probably gets a low turnout, but they have a couple of seats no matter where you are on the November ballot.
Actually, I do want to comment on that.
Yeah.
We just switched from at-large districts to individual districts. And there is a district in Central San that is empty right now. That's Division 5 in San Ramon. So if you're interested in being on the Central San board and you live in San Ramon, it's a great opportunity right now that that division is empty.
There you go. Please apply and reach out to the district if you are interested and believe you can serve in that capacity. I appreciate it. Mariah Lauritsen, president of the board of the Central Sanitation District here in Contra Costa County. I appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Wait, don't leave yet. Hit subscribe. Make sure you get the weekly updates. We have a new episode every Wednesday for stuff happening in the East Bay. In the meantime, follow me on LinkedIn, Jared Asch, or check out our firm where we have a weekly newsletter and blog at Capstone Government Affairs on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us today on the Capstone Conversation.